In this video of Game of Theories, I'll introduce self-determination theory. It is a theory that explains human motivation, performance, and well-being. People can be proactive and engaged, or passive and demotivated, largely as a function of the social conditions in which they develop and function. Many earlier theories of human motivation located the moving forces of human behavior in external sources, most notably rewards and punishment. But the self-determination theory states that although rewards and punishment are one source of human motivation, they are not the exclusive or even the most effective drivers of human behavior. Instead, the self-determination theory focuses on the sources of volitional motivation, intrinsic motivation. The self-determination theory has been increasingly used to understand the effects of management practices on employee motivation, engagement, performance, and well-being. It has been applied to explain why transformational leadership behaviors influenced employee performance, commitment to organizations, and job satisfaction. The self-determination theory has been developed for over 40 years. The early work on the self-determination theory can be traced back to 1985 in a book titled Intrinsic Motivation and Self-Determination in Human Behavior. The self-determination theory assumes that people have an inherent growth tendency and innate psychological needs that are the basis for their self-motivation. The three innate psychological needs are the needs for competence, relatedness, and autonomy. When the three psychological needs are satisfied, people are self-motivated. When those needs are blocked, people have diminished motivation and well-being. The innate needs mean that those needs are innate, not learned or socialized into us, and they are shared by all humans. When the three innate needs are satisfied, intrinsic motivation is activated, and the key behavioral and attitudinal outcomes emerge. In an article titled Self-Determination Theory and Work Motivation, researchers outlined some of those outcomes as persistence and maintained behavioral change, effective performance, particularly on tasks requiring creativity, cognitive flexibility, and conceptual understanding, job satisfaction, positive work-related attitudes, organizational citizenship behavior, which is altruism in the workplace, and ultimately psychological well-being. To sum up, studies have shown that as the three innate needs are satisfied, intrinsic motivation is cultivated, which in turn leads to a self-determined change. Competence is the need to feel effective and confident, and to express that competence in actions, words, and other ways in one's social interactions. People are motivated when they feel a sense of accomplishment. When you constantly tell others that their work is not good enough, it is very difficult for people to feel motivated. You may be telling the truth, but it is not motivating. Relatedness is feeling connected to others to the point of feeling cared for and having the opportunity to care for others. Belonging is a key human desire, and it is through relatedness that this desire is satisfied. Followers are motivated when they feel connected to their leader, and when they feel their leader have a genuine concern for them as individuals, not as means to an end. Autonomy means to act freely with a sense of volition and choice. When you delegate a task to others, give them autonomy and empower them. This can be very challenging for many leaders. Why? In my earlier video on implicit power motives, I talk about that it is an innate desire to have control. Leaders often seek to control every aspect of the task, micromanage every single detail, and intentionally or unintentionally impose their beliefs, concerns, or goals onto others. Leaders' innate desire to have control undermines others' autonomy, which is demotivating. In the self-determination theory, when those three innate psychological needs are satisfied, people are intrinsically motivated. The term intrinsic motivation refers to doing an activity for the inherent satisfaction of the activity itself. I write for at least 3 hours every day because I enjoy writing. My writing activity is driven by the inherent satisfaction of the writing itself. By contrast, extrinsic motivation refers to the performance of an activity in order to attain some separable outcome. The sources are external, such as pay and verbal recognition. I attend some meetings not because I enjoy it. I don't feel my competence is appreciated. I don't relate to the issues under discussion in meetings. I have no autonomy in meetings. There is no inherent satisfaction of attending those meetings. But I go to meetings anyway. Why? My behavior is driven by extrinsic motivation. For example, administrators mandate the meeting attendance. Here is the question. In organizations, what type of jobs that are devoid of conditions of fostering intrinsic motivation for employees? Within the self-determination theory, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci introduce a sub-theory called organismic integration theory. The organismic integration theory details different forms of extrinsic motivation and contextual factors that either motivate or hinder internalization and integration of the regulation for human behaviors. The organismic integration theory is illustrated in the figure you see on the screen. Different motivational types are arranged from left to right by the degree to which the motivations are self-determined. At the far left of the self-determination continuum is A motivation, which means the state of lacking the intent to act. In the A-motivated state, people either do not act at all or act without intent. They simply go through the motions. I call organizational members in these A-motivated states organizational zombies. How to produce organizational zombies? You can force people to do something that they don't see any value of doing it, or they don't expect it will yield a desired outcome. An example is writing a report that no one reads. Another example is that a leader asks a committee to make a decision because the leader doesn't want to take responsibility if that decision goes awry. In this case, committee members are not motivated to be a scapegoat by making that decision. To the right of A motivation, there are 5 classifications of motivated behavior. Just because all of your teammates demonstrate the same behavior doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior is driven by the same motivation. At the far right of the continuum is the state of intrinsic motivation, which means a behavior is driven by its inherent satisfaction. This state of intrinsic motivation is highly autonomous and represents self-determination. Extrinsically motivated behaviors, by contrast, covers the continuum between amotivation and intrinsic motivation, varying in the extent to which their regulation is autonomous. The extrinsically motivated behaviors that are least autonomous are referred to as externally regulated. People demonstrate this type of behavior to meet an external demand or gain a reward. I participate in the training not because the training is helpful for my work, but because the training is mandatory. My behavior is caused by external perceived locus of causality. Without the external triggers, such as external rewards or punishments, I would not demonstrate that behavior. Here, my behavior is a means to an end rather than for the enjoyment of the task itself. And the ends are controlled by others, such as rewards and punishments, not myself. The second type of extrinsic motivation is labeled introjected regulation. Introjection means the unconscious adoption of the thoughts, ideas, or attitudes of others. It involves taking in the regulation, but not fully accepting it as one's own. It means we still experience being controlled and not fully endorse the activity. It is a relatively controlled form of regulation in which behaviors are performed to avoid guilt or anxiety, to attain self-esteem, or to enhance ego and maintain a feeling of worth. A more autonomous or self-determined form of extrinsic motivation is regulation through identification. Identification reflects a conscious valuing of a behavioral goal or regulation, such that the action is accepted or considered as personally important. Finally, the most autonomous form of extrinsic motivation is integrated regulation. Integration occurs when identified regulations are in congruence with one's other values and needs. Integrated extrinsic motivation shares many of the same properties of intrinsic motivation because the extrinsic expectation has become wholeheartedly engaged and purposive with respect to the target activity and without inner barriers or conflicts. Under the right conditions, individuals internalize external influences and feel self-determined. What are the right conditions? They are the ones that satisfy people's values and fulfill the three innate psychological needs for competence, relatedness, and autonomy. According to the self-determination theory, people seek to integrate their experience and act to create a coherent self. The most powerful motivation is intrinsic motivation, followed by integrated extrinsic motivation. When intrinsically motivated, people find value and satisfaction in the activity itself, as opposed to some promised outcome. By contrast, efforts to motivate extrinsically generally involve using rewards or punishments to obtain control, compliance, obedience, or adherence. When people are intrinsically motivated, they're an actor, not simply being acted upon. To satisfy the three innate psychological needs, the needs for competence, relatedness, and autonomy. In empirical research, the conceptual distinction between identified and integrated regulation is sometimes difficult to capture for measurement purposes. So it is often the case that we only measure identified regulation. In the multidimensional work motivation scale, identified regulation instead of integrated regulation was treated as the most autonomous form of extrinsic motivation. Although experienced as autonomous, identified regulation still reflects a means to an end rather than enjoyment of the activity, as in the case of intrinsic motivation. How to measure motivation? One way is to ask about the reasons why the person exerts effort in an activity. The reasons included in the measures are selected to reflect the motivation types. For example, participants might be asked to what extent they exert effort because they are rewarded for doing so, that is external regulation, want to feel good about themselves, that is interjected regulation, see the outcomes as personally important, that is identified regulation, or enjoy the activity, that is intrinsic motivation. As I just mentioned, in the multidimensional work motivation scale, identified regulation instead of integrated regulation was treated as the most autonomous form of extrinsic motivation. Another problem with measuring motivation in this way is that the reasons individuals provide for exerting efforts are interpreted as reflecting their experience level of autonomy versus external control. Although the reasons for exerting effort can influence the way motivation is experienced, reason and experience are not the same thing. For example, although employees might work for the money, this does not preclude the possibility that they also enjoy their work and see it as important. People can report both external and internal reasons for exerting effort simultaneously. In addition to the measurement issues, some scholars noticed that the self-determination theory did not include family motivation. Family motivation is defined as a motivation where employees are driven to expend effort in order to take care of their spouses and dependents. Here is a study that built on the self-determination theory. Some people view work as an enjoyable, meaningful end in and of itself. Others view work as a means to an end, such as supporting one's family. It is not realistic for high levels of intrinsic motivation to exist in every job and for every employee. For example, intrinsic motivation is often impoverished in lower-level jobs and in developing countries. In this article titled "When Job Performance is All Relative, How Family Motivation Energizes Effort and Compensates for Intrinsic Motivation," researchers argue that family motivation can coexist with enjoyment and serve as a particularly important source of meaning when enjoyment is lacking. When intrinsic motivation is low, family motivation can compensate for a lack of intrinsic motivation. The researchers therefore developed the hypothesis that intrinsic motivation moderates the relationship between family motivation and job performance. Specifically, the researchers hypothesized that family motivation is more positively associated with performance when intrinsic motivation is low rather than high. The researchers then collected data and analyzed them. The results suggest that family motivation enhanced job performance when intrinsic motivation was low, in part by providing energy, but not by reducing stress. Supporting a family can be a powerful source of motivation that can boost job performance in the workplace. How to apply the self-determination theory? Leaders can use the self-determination theory to evaluate themselves how they have motivated or demotivated their team members. What have been done to satisfy or undermine employees' three psychological needs? What organizational structure, policies, and practices that promote or hinder employees' motivations? Not all work is intrinsically motivating. For uninteresting tasks, people need to feel competent, related, and autonomous in order to engage in those tasks and develop an autonomous type of extrinsic motivation. The frequently implemented practices to promote employee motivations in organizations, such as rewards, surveillance, and competition, often do not have the intended effects. Can you apply the self-determination theory to explain why those practices fail to motivate people? I have two more questions for you. First, how to apply the self-determination theory to provide feedback to team members in a way to motivate them instead of demoralizing them. My second question is about boomerang employees. They are workers who leave an organization and are later rehired by the same organization. Imagine that you are responsible for hiring. You have 3 options. Option 1, internal hiring, which refers to hiring or promoting someone already in your organization. Option 2, external hiring, which refers to hiring someone externally. And option 3, hiring boomerang employees, which refers to rehiring former employees. Which one would you choose? You may think it's less risky to hire boomerang employees than first-time employees. The boomerang employees are familiar with the job, understand the organization's culture and values, and may have a relationship with existing employees. Therefore, hiring the boomerang employees could reduce the time and costs associated with onboarding, training, and socialization into the organization. The boomerang employees choose to return to their former employer, perhaps after concluding the grass is not greener on the other side. This signals to existing employees that the organization is a relatively good place to work and in turn may increase employee commitment. Finally, rehiring past employees is consistent with the procedural justice principle of reconsideration with the idea of giving second chances. Are those benefits of hiring boomerang employees supported by data and evidence? In an article titled, "Welcome Back: Job Performance and Turnover of Boomerang Employees Compared to Internal and External Hires," researchers use a large longitudinal dataset to compare job performance and turnover of the boomerang employees, internal hire and external hire. Their dataset included 1,318 boomerang employees, 20,850 external hires, and 8,546 internal promotions. What are the results? The boomerang managers performed similarly to internally and externally hired managers in the first year on the job, but both internal and external hires improved more than rehires over time. Internal and external hires were also less likely to turn over from the organization than the boomerang employees, and the boomerang managers who turned over a second time tended to do so for the reasons similar to their initial turnover reasons. The results call into question of the assumed benefits of rehiring and suggest that organizations often may be better served by promoting existing employees or hiring external applicants into management positions. To explain the findings, the researchers used behavioral consistency theory, which holds that past behavior is a good predictor of future behavior. My question is, can you apply the self-determination theory to explain their research results about the performance differences among the boomerang employees, internal hires, and external hires? If you want to know more about how to build a theoretical framework for your research, I have published a book titled Demystify Theories, a workbook for developing theoretical frameworks of educational leadership research. The link of the book is in the description below.